Everyone knows the story of Joseph and his brothers. Joseph was the chosen child of Jacob, treated him with preferential treatment. And then to make things even worse, Joseph has two dreams. The dreams portend that one day they will all bow down to him. And this, of course, infuriated his brothers. And to the point where they had really very sinister ideas about how to deal with Joseph. Sure enough, Jacob sends Joseph on an errand to see how his brothers were doing. They had traveled quite a distance to be with their sheep who were grazing. And Joseph was supposed to go there to find out how they're doing. So as soon as Joseph approaches, the brothers say to each other, let's get rid of this guy. Let's actually kill him, and we'll see what will happen to his dreams. So they're ready to rip him to pieces when Reuven, the oldest brother, says to the other brothers, says, let's not harm him directly. Let's throw him into a pit nearby. And they agreed. And Reuven has Joseph placed in the pit. And his intention was that he will eventually return when his brothers would be gone and get Joseph out of the pit and return him to his father. Well, that didn't happen because by the time he returned, Joseph had already been sold by his other brother, Judah. Now, Judah was the fourth son, as opposed to Reuven, who was the oldest son. But for some reason, Judah commanded greater respect from his brothers, and he was like the leader of all the 12 sons of Jacob. And Yehudah says, no, let's not be responsible for his death. Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites as a slave, and that way his life will be spared. And sure enough, Joseph was taken out of the pit, and he was sold as a slave and ultimately ended up in Egypt. That's more or less how the story in this week's Torah portion goes. Now, when you look at the two brothers, Reuven and Yehudah, both of them intervened. Both of them tried to save Joseph's life. So you would think that they would get the same attention in our traditional and our classical sources. But no, that's not the case. Reuven is lauded. He is praised for his efforts to bring Joseph back to his father, even though he failed in the end. So Yehudah actually did what he did to save Joseph's life and put him in less danger, arguably, than what Reuven did. Yet Reuven is praised for what he did. Not only that, the Talmud says that later on, when the Jews entered into the land of Israel, they were supposed to designate 6 cities as cities of refuge. What does that mean? Someone who killed someone unintentionally, unwittingly, who could be killed by the relatives of the victim, would run away and escape to these cities of refuge, and that's where they would be safe. And there were a total of 6 of these cities in Israel. Where was the first city of refuge established? In the section of Israel that belonged to the tribe of Reuven. They were the first to get a city that protected people from being killed. And that was a reward for Reuven because he was a refuge to his brother Joseph. So Reuven is given so much credit, yet Yehudah is not given any credit. Well, to understand the difference between the two, the key word is what Yehudah used when he spoke to his brothers. And he said as follows, and he used the word betza. What benefit will we have if we kill him? We'll have no benefit. But the Talmud observes that the word betza, besides being benefit, means compromise. Let's compromise. We're not going to kill him, but we will sell him to the Ishmaelites and have him brought to the land of Egypt, far, far away from his father. That is the fundamental difference between Yehudah and Reuven. They both compromised. Reuven didn't say to his brothers, no, we're not going to kill him, I'm going to bring him back to our father, because he felt that they wouldn't listen to him. He didn't command the respect, even though he was the eldest brother, he didn't have that influence over his brother. So he did what was second best. Let him go into the pit temporarily, and then later on he'll come back and bring him back to his father. So there are 2 points over here. Number one, he didn't have an alternative. Number two, his goal was to bring him back to his father. It didn't materialize that way, but his intention was 100% to bring him back to Jacob. And he had no other alternative. If he did anything else, the brothers would not have listened to him, and Joseph would have been gone. Yehuda, on the other hand, also compromised. But his compromise was different, because Yehuda did command the respect of his brothers. And if he said, no, we're not going to do anything to Joseph, this is wrong, let's bring him back to our father, they would have listened. That's number one. But more importantly, perhaps, is the second point. The second point is he compromised, but in no way did he intend to bring him back to his father. This was a compromise that he allowed in spite of the fact that it would never really restore Joseph to his father and correct what was done wrong. That is the difference between these two kinds of compromises. You see, sometimes we have to compromise in life. There's a famous explanation as to why when we place a mezuzah on the doorposts of our homes, the mezuzah is on a slant in Ashkenazic communities. Why is it on a slant? So the reason given is that there's really a dispute. Some say the mezuzah should be vertical, and some say it should be horizontal. Well, since we don't know which opinion to follow, we make a compromise and we put it on a little bit of a slant. So it's a little bit of vertical, it's a little bit of horizontal. But there's a beautiful lesson that many rabbis have used in their sermons at weddings, and they tell this prospective bride and bridegroom, you're starting a home, and inevitably, you're two people, each one has his or her own mind. There will be disagreements. Learn to compromise. When you enter into a new home, you have to compromise. Two business partners have a dispute, and they come to the Beit Din, to the Jewish court, or someone who lent money to someone else and the person isn't repaying it. So they come to a Jewish court. The first thing the rabbinic judges will say, let's see if we can find a compromise so that both sides will be somewhat satisfied. Compromise between two people, each one foregoing his or her rights, his or her advantages, is a positive thing. But even when it comes to spiritual matters, there are times when we can't go all the way. When we're dealing with American youth, for example, and for that matter, youth all over the world, they are the Josephs of our generation, and they are threatened with being lost to the Jewish people and then never going to be allowed to come back to their Father in heaven. So there are two approaches, two compromises. One is a kosher, legitimate one, and one is an illegitimate. One is a Reuven approach, and one is a Yehuda approach. The Reuven approach says, you can't take someone who has no exposure to Judaism and bring him back to his Father in heaven in one movement. It takes time. First, you have to introduce them to one mitzvah, and you get them to do that one mitzvah, and then they do another mitzvah. As long as we can't do it any other way, because a human being is not going to change overnight, and as long as our ultimate goal is to bring them back to their Father in heaven, so we're not institutionalizing the compromise. We're not enshrining it and saying the compromise is an end. The compromise is a temporary means with which we are equipped to get to the end. And that is our sole intention, to reach the end, to bring everyone back to our Father in heaven. But there's also a deeper point. If you just talk to another person and you refer to them as being outside, and we use the term outreach, then there's a good chance that that compromise will remain the way it is. It will not progress. But when you do what we call inreach, you touch a nerve in their soul and stimulate their spiritual core, then you know inevitably it will progress, it will grow until this person is brought back to his Father in heaven. Then there's the Yehuda approach. The Yehuda approach is compromise. Tell them that there's no need to do any more. Whatever they do is fine, and it could stay that way. That type of a compromise will never lead to the success in bringing this person back to his Father in heaven. That person is doomed to remain in Egypt, in exile. Now, this Torah portion that we are reading this week coincides with the holiday of Hanukkah. And there you see the two kinds of compromises. On one hand, when they couldn't light the menorah after they dedicated the temple that was defiled by the Greeks, the Syrian Greeks, what they did is they found one cruse of pure, uncontaminated oil that would suffice for one night. And it would take them 8 days before they can get a fresh supply. So they compromised. They said, look, we're going to light the menorah tonight, even though for 7 nights we're not going to be able to do it. They compromised. But their compromise was a legitimate compromise because all they had was that one cruse of pure oil. The other oil was contaminated. And even though Jewish law says you can use contaminated oil when you have nothing else, they didn't want that compromise. They wanted to compromise to do whatever they can do right now. And God performed a miracle that they didn't need the compromise. And they had enough oil to last for the full 8 days, miraculously. Now this is a story that happened with Joseph, who was sold by his brothers, and Reuven is the one who did one compromise, which we praise, and Yehuda made the wrong compromise. Yeah, we're not going to kill him, but we'll sell him to Egypt, bring him and take him further away from his father. Now Yehuda is the leader of the Jewish nation because the kings, King David, King Solomon, and all the great Jewish kings were descendants of Yehuda, and Mashiach will be the final descendant of Yehuda who will take us out of exile. Because Yehuda made the mistake then, it's his role to correct that mistake. And that's what the leaders who are the descendants of Yehuda have been doing from the beginning of the Jewish nation's inception until the present day. Jewish leaders are charged with a mission to bring every Joseph back to the fold, return him to his Father in heaven. And that job will be completed only by Mashiach in the Messianic era, which we believe and hope and pray for will happen imminently. But meanwhile, in our own lives, we have to recognize that sometimes a compromise may be necessary, but we shouldn't institutionalize that compromise and realize that the ultimate goal of the compromise is to remove the need for the compromise, because we will go all the way and greet Mashiach.